Okay. Well, we are live on Twitter, we are live on YouTube, and we're working on Facebook. Give it a second.
Sure. I'm hearing a little echo, Jay.
Um, I have headphones on. Matt, do you think you could turn down your volume just a hair and see if that helps? Is that better?
I don't know. Yeah,
All right.
I think so.
Great.
Are we live on Facebook?
Are we live on Facebook right now? No. Ah, technology, man. Um, what do you want me to do?
We'll drink some tea in the meantime.
Sure,
How about
or
that?
just untoggle that manual thing you selected and let's look at it. Yeah.
And if you could ask Greta, I'm sure she'll know, but given that the technical difficulties, once we have a Facebook link, send it over, Jay, on the chat so that I can post it. Cool. All right. Hey, everybody.
All right, move the light to the other page, okay? Hey.
I'm Jay. Are we good? All right. I'm TQ. This is my brother JQ. This is Tea Time at the Apothecary. Thank you for joining us. And we have a very special guest today, Alderman of the 47th Ward, which is our ward here in Lincoln Square, Matt Martin. Matt, welcome.
Thank you. Good being with you both.
Yeah, good to have you here. Thank you very much. So while we're working out some of the difficulties of getting online on all the feeds, and Jay is our audio and technical engineer,
Okay.
let's talk about drinking tea.
We're live. We're live.
Yay. Hello, FB. What's up? All right. So Matt, I think my brother and I have been for maybe a month now drinking tea every day or every few days at noon. And we started inviting some guests on. So thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. It's exciting to have you on board with us and drinking some tea and taking some breaths and talking about life.
Indeed. Likewise. Good to be joining.
Yeah.
Matt, I met you when you showed up on my doorstep with your mom.
I remember. Yep.
And I was like, oh, you should talk to my brother. You should go stop by Mers and talk to my brother. He doesn't technically live in the ward, but he has a business in the ward. I think you'd have a pretty cool, robust conversation. He has some good ideas, and I knew you guys would chop it up in a good way. And it was just a delight meeting you and your mom. And we talked about a lot of interesting stuff. I know the conversation went on probably longer than you wanted it to because you had so many houses to but we were talking about being mixed race kids and having kids and trying to talk about trying to have them grow up in a diverse community. And what a flash forward to a year later.
Mm-hmm.
you know um how are you talking to your kids right now? I'm looking up resources on how to do that. It's hard at their age, what they have the capacity to understand. I get frustrated and upset that I have to tell them that maybe my conversation will make them acknowledge a difference that they don't naturally see, which makes me sad.
Mm-hmm.
But I know it's necessary. I don't know. These are questions I'm grappling with. How are you dealing with it as alderman, as a father, as a man?
Just throw a simple question out there, huh, Jay? Let's just start out.
Starting with the softball.
You had a sip of tea, Matt. Let's go.
Well,
There's no time for, there's no.
well, I had it figured out, so you're welcome. But I guess I'll start with as a father. So I've got a 9-month-old and a 5-year-old. So the 9-month-old, that's not an issue whatsoever. With the 5-year-old, I would say it's been within the last, several months, maybe up to 6 months, where he really became aware of like race, like in skin color. Just noting like, dad is black or dad has darker skin than mom, but not at that time initially associating that with anything other than, you know, there's like, you look somewhat different, not unlike long hair versus short hair, eye color. But I knew that things would be changing. I had no idea that we would need to accelerate a series of conversations with him. And to your point, Jay, find ways to communicate in a way that I think is like authentic for us, that is truthful, because I don't think we want to take things down to a level where it loses its meaning entirely as we're trying to talk to somebody who is like still figuring this stuff out in a very introductory way. So that sensitivity is challenging, but I think for us, it's not shying away from, I think, high level issues of, it's throughout our country's history that people have been treated differently because of certain things, and race is at the core of that. And so that's something that thankfully has been covered in his school curriculum. He goes to McPherson Elementary, he's finishing up their pre-K program. And so for a number of months, I'm sure they did this in February with Black History Month, that was a topic of conversation, like, you know, civil rights movements, and just foundationally this idea of, you know, separate but equal is not equal. And so those, I think, bite-sized ideas he can understand. And so it's been an especially challenging week when I have to leave, because I'm less present than I was. I, like a lot of families with children, was more present during the first few weeks and months of COVID, because we closed our office to the public, and the school option has gone away. We are fortunate where we have two folks in our family, two close relatives, who are able to watch our kids sometimes, but still my wife and I are shouldering more of the day-to-day child care responsibilities than we were pre-COVID. So it changed abruptly this week when I needed to be out more. I needed to be surveying what was going on in the ward, and talking with business owners, talking with colleagues, just figuring out what we needed to respond to and how we were going to respond to that. And so that kind of accelerated conversations around answering the question of why we're protesting, what we're trying to change, what I need to go out and do. And again, trying to find ways that we can be straightforward with him, that he can understand, that he can kind of he can warehouse in a way and then build upon that as we go forward. But that's been hard. It's been really sad, because I knew my dad was not around. He's Black, he's from West Africa. My mom is an Irish Catholic woman. That's where I got my freckles and the reddish tint in my hair. She raised me by herself in Southern Arizona, where there's not a large Black community. So from a pretty early age, I was starting around the time starting around the time of 5, where my son is, I knew that I was different, and that meant different things as I became older. And also knowing that my son would go through similar things and would have, I think, similar acknowledgments and similar experiences. And some of those are beautiful, but some of those are challenging. And some of them, it's a mix, and it depends on where you're at in your life. So it's just a real complicated set of emotions there. So maybe I'll stop there and to know kind of what, you know, your responses, your reactions, and your own experiences, because I don't want to then just go into kind of the more adult conversations.
I appreciate that. That's helpful. And
well, I have a question based on that, Matt. I guess, you know, you're talking about you're sort of mixing there in your response. Your response as a parent, as a father, and then as a public figure, and someone who's sort of helping shepherd our community and our ward, the 47th ward, through this time, and representing our city and the residents here. And I guess one of the things that, you know, to kind of take that, like, we're all of us are parents on this, in this chat, the three of us, but and we're all dealing with those problems. I think as a business owner, one of the things that I'm struggling with is sort of trying to maintain a sense of balance with all these things, both like, I mean, right now, let's be honest, like it already was in COVID, and then in the past week with the sort of legitimate outrage, it's balancing sort of like the biggest concerns in the world with also the most day-to-day problems that we have, and they're sort of reaching a peak all at the same time. Is that fair to say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm kind of curious how you do that. Like I freak out in a biz sometimes. I got to be honest, I'm an emotional guy in a business with 30 some 40 people. You're here in a ward where a lot of people are looking to you, thousands of people. And I'm wondering how you're able to both address that and kind of personally keep your head on straight with, in that situation.
Yeah. It's a hard question to answer because in some ways I don't have a lot of time to reflect on how I'm doing and how I can be doing better, both just be doing my job better, but also self-care, which I think is really important during these times. So I'm really fortunate. My spouse is terrific, and I think we've been together for a long time, and she's really intuitive in terms of, I think, having a sense for when I really need to have a conversation, whether it's a serious one or even just something like, hey, let's go for a walk. Let's do something just to get our mind off of things for a little bit and just for even a few minutes, recapture a little bit of what we had pre-COVID. There are times where she's given me some space to process because as a person of color, in particular as a Black man, over the last week and a half, it's been challenging to be reminded of the challenges that Black men in particular, but people of color more generally, continue to face in our country and in our city. So it's hard. There are times where you get emotional and you very much feel the weight of things, but because so much of this week has been reactive in ways, I haven't thought as much about how am I doing in that regard. I will say, and I'm sure you can feel this, you can appreciate this too, as a business owner, the people you work with, you rely on them in so many ways.
Yeah.
They ground me in the way that my family does when we have these huge issues where people, this was the case with COVID, this continues to be the case with the protest related issues that we've been dealing with. They take their emotions and they need places to direct it to. And oftentimes it's to government leaders, and sometimes they're very upset, rightfully so, they're angry. Sometimes they're profoundly sad and they're broken and they're just wondering, hey, I've lost my income. I'm worried that I'm going to lose my home. Can you help me? And so having folks to help spread those responsibilities so that it's not literally me calling every single one of those folks, emailing every single one of those folks. One, there's not enough time in the day, but two, we need to take care of each other to make sure that we can continue to do this work. So I've never been more thankful for my staff than I have been over the last week and the last 2.5 months.
No, I totally understand that. And I think, I do relate to that and can understand about relying on your colleagues and your team. But also, I think one of the things that's really interesting to me is the fact that for whatever you can say about, the Chicago system, the alderman role is one where sort of it's the most local of politics, right? I can, non-COVID times, I've walked into your office before and can get someone to help me with hey, I'm having a problem with this. Can you help? And I think sometimes people don't realize that because not everyone has utilized the sort of availability of your team and your office before. But it's something that has always impressed me is that, a lot of us tend, especially at a time like this where we have legitimate frustration, rage, disappointment, all kinds of emotions. There's this feeling of we have to focus at the national level. And in reality, there's so much, let's be honest, it's the local level that we live at. And I think here is where we're going to have the biggest opportunity to make a difference in the daily lives of our neighbors, ourselves, and our fellow citizens in this city, So I think that, I guess I would say thank you for that, for being available, first of all. And it does feel, it feels good to have a city where a place where that actually happens and you feel like I can reach out to you. So I would like to dive into some of the things that maybe right now, I feel like so many people are kind of in this way of this situation of, I'd like to be involved and I'd like to help in some way, but kind of feel well, I don't know if I should go to a protest, and like maybe is money enough? So I thought maybe we could talk about some things that, what are you, if someone came to you with that question, I know your office has some answers and we will definitely post some of them, but I'd like to hear from you some of those, what you would tell someone who's coming with good intentions, but maybe not enough information about what to do next.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's, I think we oftentimes start off with, what do you have the interest and capacity to do? Because we could start off by saying, here's a list, but maybe there's something not on that list that they would be really interested in, that they're already aware of, that they could articulate, or that it's at the bottom of the list and they've already kind of stopped listening because it's all these options that just aren't the right fit for them. So we oftentimes start that way, whether someone calls us or emails us. And after having those conversations, where we often land are several buckets. And I think increasingly there's a focus around what we could do locally, what we could do like hyper-locally in the ward, what we could do citywide, region-wide, and then stuff beyond that. So in terms of local, it's varied, it's ebbed and flowed, but certainly supporting our food pantries. We've got a tremendous one, Common Pantry, that does really important work. The Friendship Center is another one. Just outside of the ward, but they service a lot of folks in the ward, as well as the Lakeview Pantry. So food, because I think at a high level, what we need right now, and especially at the outset of COVID, we need food instability, housing instability, and health stability. So that food part is critical.
Needs. Yeah.
Exactly. So that was one. Second was finding ways to support our local businesses, because they are such an economic engine within our community. There are so many folks who live within our community, but also work within our community. And so losing a degree of income is disastrous, because I don't need to tell you all, but when you have a local business, they are much likelier to take their profits and reinvest them locally in so many different ways. And so reminding folks, if you're able to, don't buy something online, try to find a local retailer to do that. If you can, maybe use to eat out, see if you can do carry out, or if even you like to cook from home, still see if you can support that business in some way. And some of our food businesses and beverage businesses, they've closed temporarily. They haven't been able to reopen, but they still have GoFundMe pages or other things where they're trying to support their staff. And so we've steered folks that way. So I think those businesses, food, have been a real focus locally. When it comes to city, it's similar stuff, but it can be in different ways. So we might start talking about some larger institutions like the United Way that have helped put together funds that anybody can contribute to, but those funds are used in some really innovative, flexible ways. It could be used for, hey, here's someone who maybe is at risk of losing their housing. We want to make sure that we can throw them a little bit of money to stabilize them for another month. That's something. The food issue is a really big one. Ways to, I think, especially after what has happened over the last week, in particular on parts of the South and West sides, there are existing groups like My Block, My Hood, My City that are accepting donations so that they can then spread them out to the communities that have been most impacted by property damage.
They're amazing. They're amazing.
Exactly. So as more of those get stood up, we're going to continue to let our constituents know about those options. And then finally, and hopefully this will be more of a short-term thing, when it comes to cleaning up after, say, a property has experienced some damage. I've been in touch with some of my colleagues so that if it's someone in their office or someone in the community that has contact information that I can share with our residents, that folks know, hey, if I've got 2 hours and I would like to help clean up, that here is someone I can contact so that I can know where to go. I think that's really helpful. And then finally, at the federal level, particularly with regard to the racism issues, the structural inequity issues that are, again, forefront of people's minds, reminding them of different institutions that are doing tremendous work there, whether it's the NAACP, the ACLU, places like that, letting them know, hey, these are institutions that for decades have been fighting the critical fight, and they need your support now more than ever.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think when I remember a year ago, and I'm sure it wasn't the year you expected this first year in office, but you ran on a platform certainly about education and supporting quality education. You also ran on police reform. And I guess, it seems a very appropriate time to talk about what that means, because I think that, right, like one of the reasons we've been doing these teas for us is just to be able to talk about things. And I think that in general, we don't have enough talk about things that are, social media tends to make things either you're for this or you're against this. And the reality is life is very messy, and we need to get into the mix on things and talk about that. So I would say, I guess, and somebody comes to you and says, what does police reform mean and why do we need it? Obviously, we can see why we need it, but what does that mean? How do we start talking about this in a way that doesn't devolve into it's good or it's bad?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really important question and a challenging one to answer based in part on what you mentioned, which is different people come at this issue in different ways, different experiences that maybe they're inclined to hear you out, maybe they're coming in saying, I already have it figured out, and I either want to argue with you or I want affirmation. So that certainly can be challenging, but hey, that's part of the job. That's what I've signed up for.
Yeah. And the nice thing is you can say it right now and address the people as if they're listening, because if they're not, they're just going to log off anyway. So.
Yeah. So, let me root it in what you mentioned, which was, when I ran, it wasn't just an issue that I knew was important, but it was something that I had some experience with, a good amount of experience. So before I became the alderperson here, I worked at the Illinois Attorney General's office, and we had a large team that helped craft the consent decree, which is a very, very long, several hundred-page document. It is essentially a contract that says from soup to nuts, you need to do these sorts of things within this particular timeline when it comes to how we train officers, how we supervise them, how we hold them accountable when misconduct occurs, how we provide them access to mental health resources, and how we track and manage data so we can figure out what's working and what isn't. And so it's through that work where you start to see, okay, here's what we need to do in terms of a number of first steps. Because look, you step back, and I think probably everybody who is watching this will remember the Laquan McDonald murder, where they were when they watched that video, the outcry, the injustice that everybody felt when we learned about that, and knowing that that wasn't an isolated incident, that fit within a broader framework of how policing has occurred in Chicago for way too many years, and how every 10 years you have a real problem incident like that really gets everybody's attention, but it's not used effectively in a way where we say, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's what real reform looks like. We finally were able to achieve that, I believe, with that consent decree, because we had a federal judge who came in and said, we're going to hold you to it. You can't put this idea, like this set of recommendations, on the shelf the way that you did after, say, the John Burge abuse happened, or even way back in the 60s when Congressman Ralph Metcalf said, here's a Blue Ribbon Commission report about what we're going to do specifically about discipline. So the consent decree outlines a lot of those steps. We also had a monitoring report, so this independent monitor that reports to the federal judge on progress. That monitor report, the first one and only one that came out fall of last year, that said, we're not on track. You're not on track, Chicago. That you had 50 benchmarks that you needed to achieve. You only hit 13. So 13 out of those 50 you hit. The other 37, you're not on track. So we know in the short term we need to get those right. But then there are things that the consent decree didn't cover. And we know that we really need to prioritize those. And one of them, I believe, is civilian oversight over our police department. We have a number of different cities, especially LA, that already do that. But when you talk about what's one of those critical things that we need to address and address quickly, it's that lack of trust that in some communities never existed between members of the community and the police department. And so if folks, they'll look at elected officials and say, you've been here for decades and the problem is still there. And so I think in many ways they understand, rightfully so, that we need to have more of a community voice, and that community voice be central in what policing and public safety looks like. We have two bills essentially that have been introduced. We've had one subject matter hearing already. I I think that's one of the very first things City Council needs to do to help show folks that we are on the path towards reform, towards justice, and towards a greater feeling of trust.
That's really good to know. And I guess it kind of gets at something that I think about, which is obviously you wouldn't be in this position and have run for this office if you didn't think there was an opportunity to change. I guess sometimes when you start talking about something that is so institutional, like what you just described with the, sort of policing and the way that it's done.
It feels so daunting, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I know I don't expect an answer of no, but are you optimistic that we can make movement on this and anytime soon? And how do you stay optimistic when tackling something that feels so entrenched?
Yeah, I do feel optimistic, and it's even more than that. It's my expectation that we're going to do these things because we have to, and it's my job and the job of my colleagues to get it done. So it's just kind of wringing our hands and saying, well, we tried, but we need to move on. That's not an option. I think that the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of protesters in Chicago and then millions throughout the country, they have reminded us that this needs to again be a real priority. So not addressing it, again, that's just not something that I'm really conceiving of. What I think is really important are two things. One, that we need to refocus what we do based on what our community's needs are. And it's not just like from an armchair standpoint, oh, well, I've thought about it and I've read some books and this is what I think our community needs. We need to talk with folks. We need to listen, and we need to constantly cycle through, okay, this is what you've told me, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? Does that respond to the pain that you're feeling, the frustration you're feeling, and the hope and expectations that you have of folks in my position? So I think first is making sure that we're grounded in that way. And that's why I think civilian oversight is so critical, because that's like literally the physical manifestation of centering community voice and what reform looks like. And then second is, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are lots of other cities who have and are continuing to focus on reform. So that's where, especially folks in my position, it's my job to think about these sorts of policies. Right, yeah. Exactly. I talk with experts. I talk with folks in other cities to say, what have you done? What do you recommend? What is working? What isn't? And then I take that back to my community. I take that back to my colleagues. And that's how I believe we'll start to get this job done.
I was in the store earlier picking up some things and in our store. And I was talking to Alex, our buyer. And Alex, I said, how's it going, man? And, there's a solemnity just across the board when you're talking to people right now, in sort of the wake of a tragedy of this level. There's a level of just kind of, and he said, I am so hopeful. And it really made me, I was caught off guard by it, because I'm still really rageful. And he was saying he's so hopeful because the new generation of young people, younger than us three, he's like, they catch all this flack for not having real jobs and being gig workers and not taking on real responsibilities. But who has the time now to go out there, protest, make sure this stays on the forefront of people's minds? And who could, because the older generation has a potentially more to lose, or more,
change is harder.
Change is harder. We become brittle when we're older because we have these responsibilities, we have these kids, we have these mortgages, and that becomes sometimes trumps what you wish you could spend your time doing because you just have to provide, and he's saying what a gift that these kids have prioritized a different way of life, because now they are forcing us to change in such an awesome way. And I thought, what a cool way of looking at it. Do you see that as well when you look at the upcoming generation?
I do. And part of it's informed by my recollection of and experiences with the Great Recession, because this isn't the only time in recent memory where we've had something really shake us to our core. And so I think one thing to remember is that is a lot of what your exposition laid out. Younger folks, younger adults are uniquely poorly situated to weather these shocks. So if you're a gig worker and pay is unpredictable, you pay health insurance out of pocket, or you don't have health insurance. You feel these economic disruptions so much more acutely than folks in older generations oftentimes. And the sort of frustration, I think there's a sort of clarity with that comes from that pain, that frustration, and that fear that sometimes other folks don't have. And I think that that's important to recognize. And it's folks who in some ways, in varying ways, are embarking on a different phase of their life too. And so they have these sorts of hopes where maybe they're not 50 or 60 where they said, hey, like my aspirations maybe have crested in some ways. And so my priorities are looking different. And so when they're looking at this, and I think like two other examples from an environmental standpoint, you see organizations like the Sunrise Movement that are really directed and led by youth, because they will be alive a little while after us. And I still am a relatively youthful person. So
I'd say you're of that generation, from what I could tell.
Yeah, but I think you see that, I think, clarity of purpose with regard to issues like that, issues regarding healthcare, issues regarding housing. And I think that police reform has risen back up in terms of the broader public consciousness there. And so I think that it's really important that we take note of that and we engage, because they're right. You know, folks who are saying, look, it's amidst COVID, I will wear a mask and I will try to socially distance as much as myself, as much as I can, but I need to be here. I need to, if I'm able, share my voice. And my voice can be literally me shouting, me talking. It can be me just physically being present time after time after time to remind folks this issue hasn't gone away just because it's been more than a week since George Floyd was murdered. So I completely agree that we need to make sure, whether you're in government or not, that those voices are just as important as the other voices that we hear.
Yeah. I think when I hear this, I mean, part of the, you know, what comes to mind is this idea of cities as the laboratories of democracy right now, right? I mean, that's kind of like a lot of people talk about that, but I feel like it does feel that way. We're going to have to figure these things out in our cities because we have all these issues sort of bumping into each other all the time. And in that sense, it does feel hopeful. It's like in everything we do in life, we go through hard times first. And so that's kind of where I get some hope, although I struggle sometimes to keep it up. But it's this idea of, hey, we didn't expect anything was going to be easy in life. And so like, we've got to work through this now. And I feel like, you know, you're talking about those things. I think you mentioned some organizations that are working on that. I did want to ask about one particular one, because I know I understand that you're a supporter, and we've been talking in my family about sort of support for bond, bail programs, things like that. And I think it's the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Oppression. Is that correct? I think it's something that I know that I understand that you are a supporter of, and I'd like to hear about that if possible. And sort of
so is it the civilian oversight component a little bit more, or are you thinking about something else? Because I know it's maybe an umbrella organization that does a number of things.
Yeah, well, I guess, personally, what I'm interested in is this idea, because I think it's challenging to a lot of people's notions about the way our society should work, is this idea that the system is so stacked that we need to start looking at why certain groups of people, poor people, many Black people, are not able to pay bail and not able to get sort of the fair hearing that we talk about. that we assume for white folks or white collar criminals or whatever, and why that sucks.
Yeah, yeah, got it. Yeah, so that was an issue I worked on at the Attorney General's office before I became an alderman. And it's something, unfortunately, that we don't have as much of a direct impact on at the city as we do at the county level or the state level, but we do have some role to play. And yeah, the idea is historically, if someone is charged with an offense, they appear before a judge, and there's a set of questions that typically a judge will ask or should ask, and under the current thinking is someone at risk of committing a new offense, and is someone at risk of not showing up to a subsequent court hearing? And I think the evidence bears out that neither of those are reasons that you should increase bail so as to keep someone in jail. And there are lots of reasons for that. One is if someone, say, is unstably housed and or has mental health issues, and one of those things or something else may hinder them from coming to a subsequent hearing. Well, just keeping them in prison is that, or keeping them in jail, is that really what we want to do? For any number of reasons. One, you're obviously significantly curtailing their freedom, which means they aren't able to earn income, they aren't able to see their loved ones. I mean, I think just like from a moral standpoint, that's just like personal affront with that. And we also know that when you increase that bail and say someone is able to pay, you don't see a rise in them showing up subsequently. So even the idea that, oh, it might be intuitively plausible to some that you increase bail so that someone is less likely to do something that you don't want them to, the evidence doesn't bear that out. So we're really, to your point, just punishing folks disproportionately if they aren't able to meet this financial burden that we place on them. And some folks, they will languish in jail for well over a year for any number of procedural or substantive reasons, which means, again, you're preventing them from earning a living. You're preventing them from just being free and being around their
like a bottomless pit, right? I mean, it's like,
exactly,
once you get in that, like now you've been out of the labor force, you haven't been making money, you're in a situation where it's even less likely that you're able to be a functioning member of our society. Because
there's like institutionalization sets in. There's a bunch of, I mean, I've seen a lot of, me and my other brother do a lot of, not a lot, but as much as we can when we get the opportunity, work in the prisons, bringing hip hop, Shakespeare, our art into the prison systems. And there's a lot of people bringing Shakespeare in, and they bring us in, and it's been like, I mean, it is heavy going into those places and hearing those stories that exactly like you're saying, just like, oh, I'm waiting for a hearing, you know?
Yeah.
Just like, how long you been here? A year, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. So I think we've got folks at the state level who are focused on this with like laser interest. I was talking with one of them yesterday, State Senator Robert Peters. He is actually, his predecessor is the current Attorney General for the state of Illinois, Kwame Raoul, and his predecessor was President Obama. So it's like, you know, it's a cool seat to have. There's some history there.
Nice coaching tree
there. Yeah. Indeed. And so he's really focused on this issue, and I think that he's poised to help make some real significant reforms in this regard. But really the idea is, one, remember, innocent until proven guilty. And so many of these issues that keep folks in jail, it's minor offenses. But again, if it's, hey, you need to pay $200, $300, $400 to get out, you don't have it. I mean, are you kidding me? Like that's the difference between someone being jailed for a significant period of time and having their freedom. And then again, like stepping back, when we look at our criminal justice system more broadly, we know that the instability that, say, we have officers respond to, that instability is disproportionately felt in our communities of color. It's housing instability, food instability, mental health instability, education instability. Those are structural forces that we need to do a better job in government of addressing. And so if you already are dealing with someone who's unstable in their life in one or more of those ways, jailing them for a significant period of time will only exacerbate that. It will not improve that situation. I think that it's time that we recognize that and have policies that reflect it.
I have a quick question about just like, because in some ways what we're talking about is, yeah, the bail money, but also ability to sort of navigate like systemic bureaucracy is an issue. And and I find that like to be really infuriating for me. Like, you know, like when I'm dealing with insurance stuff, or when I'm trying to deal with, I lost all my gigs for the whole year. I'm trying to deal with unemployment stuff. And I was going through it and I was thinking to myself, I I needed to ask two people to help me fill out these forms. I'm a person who went to a college preparatory high school, and English is my
And you get
first language.
all the advantages
And
of
English is
navigating systems.
and English is my first language. How can we change these websites? Like, how can we change these forms? Is there a movement for that? And who's working on that? And do you know? And how can we help? You know, like,
Yeah, I think yeah, it's a really critical point, and I think it depends on what sort of forms you're talking about. But when I think about something like COVID, I think has exacerbated existing fault lines, existing problems. So if you see that unemployment insurance issue that so many folks have been dealing with, too many, I mean, that there's Illinois system was not meant to deal with that. And that's the case with every other state. And so you have this system where folks need to know immediately that they can apply successfully, they can get benefits. Like weeks and weeks passed before independent contractors were able to successfily apply, like even apply at all. Like they just would not be processed. And so I think when we're talking about,
it's almost like they don't want you to get it. You know what I mean? It really feels like the drop-off rate on those forms and on those. I would love to see the stats on that because I bet they're horrendous, you know?
Yeah. And think about it like, say you get a fine. I remember really distinctively. So I have a car and I bought a sticker, which you have to do annually, and some permits. Bought it in October. Supposed to go up on the car in January, and I just forgot. It was like in a stack of mail that I just neglected to look at, and I put something else on top of it. We get 4 tickets that in total are $550 at the very end of January. And in order to appeal these, you really, to your point, you have to know the system. And I was a lawyer at the time, and I still like remember a good amount of my training. And so I was able to take time off of work to go downtown during the day in order to contest these. Thankfully, I was successful, but it was a real hurdle, a series of hurdles that I had to jump over. And to your point, it's okay if we.
You have a law degree.
We rely on that funding to fund government, right? We're nickel and diming people, and the folks whose nickels and dimes we can keep are the ones who can least afford to pay that. Why is that the case? In part because of this Byzantine system that is so challenging to navigate and requires time, requires flexibility, requires other resources. So we're starting, at least at the city level, to make some progress there. It's a little bit too slow, but you can look at it even some other ways. Again, going back to that unemployment point, my predecessor, Mayor Pawar, he and a number of others are real big supporters of universal basic income, because at the end of the day, if you see these fluctuations, they can be wild when it comes to people's finances because of things like COVID or otherwise, to have that sort of stability that allows you to pay those core bills, to stay housed, to have food, to have the peace of mind, to reduce stress levels from that floor, I think is so critical. And we'll, I think especially after the November elections are done, I think we'll start to see that come more to the forefront, particularly at the national level.
Yeah, I have something that I want to kind of bring up because I've been sort of thinking a lot about how do we keep the pressure on. And aside, obviously, we talked about keeping the pressure on by keeping your voices out there, showing up at protests. But I feel like change is going to happen when the person who has nothing but good intentions, but a busy life, decides that they need to do more. That's kind of my personal theory. And I think that sometimes there's this feeling of like, I support you, but you say a certain thing and people start to get defensive. And I'm going somewhere with this, and that is, I think that there's a difference between fault and responsibility that doesn't get talked about enough, where people tend to say, hey, you need to do this. And people say, it's not my fault. Like, I don't have these racist beliefs, or I'm not doing this. And I think that part of it is we have to start talking about, like, yes, we acknowledge it's not literally your fault, but that doesn't mean it's not your responsibility. And like, you are responsible for things that have nothing to do with your faults or you making a choice. Things are laid on us all the time, right? And you got a ticket. That's not it turned out it wasn't your fault. You did the right thing, but it was your responsibility to deal with it. And I feel like I want to turn that on its head and say, like, if you are not happy living in a society where, people of color feel worried about letting their kids walk outside and play in the neighborhood in the same way as other kids, or don't have the same opportunities as other people, that may not be your fault, but it is your responsibility.
That's right. That's right.
I know we're running up on time, and I felt like maybe that's my axe to grind, but I felt like I wanted to say it out loud because I can't stop thinking about it as the answer to people that I feel like are well-meaning, but sort of can start to get dismissive at when it's like, well, it's crossing over into my time or my comfort zone.
Yeah, I think that's a really wonderful point. And it reminds me of an earlier part of the conversation. We were talking about, hey, if people want to get active, if they want to get supportive, what can they do? Different people have different abilities, areas of interest, but to call somebody, to call an elected representative, and even if it's just as simple as, hey, I'm concerned about this, what are you doing about it? Put someone in my position, okay, well, we better have an answer for them. Yeah. And if we don't have an answer, well, we've got some work to do. To send an email, I think it might seem so modest individually, but in the aggregate can have such a profound impact to even just ask questions. And certainly if one has time to make demands, to make their opinions known, even better. But absolutely, I think it's critical for folks to increase, to deal with the tipping points of, if for some people, they can do that all by themselves. For others, they might need to see one or two other people do it before they do it. For others, they need to see 10, 15, 20 people do it. And so if we all find ways in which we can express ourselves in an authentic and clear way. Exactly. And that's what we're seeing right now. And that's a reason why, that's one of the many reasons why I am heartened.
Yeah. Hey, Matt.
How do you like the tea, Matt?
Yeah.
I think it's
he hasn't
delicious.
had any to drink for a while. Doing a lot of talking.
It's pretty good, right?
Green tea, ginger, grapefruit. It's one of our favorites. I do want to ask a couple personal questions because I know you have to go soon. One is, I'm a huge jazz fan, and I saw you were a jazz studies major, right? Is that right? So
that's right.
That's awesome. So give me your, I know it's hard to pick a favorite, but favorite or top 3 jazz artists, if you had to pick
right now, just
Desert Island. You're going to a desert island. We're putting you on a plane. Who are you listening to?
Oh man, it has been a minute. So one, I'll just keep it with saxophone players because that's what I'm most familiar with. And I was a saxophone player myself.
Nice.
So I would do Joe Henderson, who's someone who kind of flies under the radar a little bit, but
he's
absolutely awesome. Tremendous player, really beautiful. And then kind of like going backwards, John Coltrane, and then I feel like with jazz, it's hard to not include Charlie Parker. So I'll go with those 3.
Nice.
I'm with you on all of those. That's awesome.
We're both huge jazz, as you can tell by my insane collection.
Yeah. The other connection I want to make before we go is you both, my brother and Matt, you both have daughters named Amina.
Really?
Yeah. So you both of your youngest daughters your younger daughter, Jay's youngest daughter, are named Amina, slightly different spelling. I know for us that comes from the Indian Pakistani side of our family. My uncle was Uncle Amin. I'm curious, just sort of, first of all, Amina is one of my favorite names. My older daughter's middle name is Amina as well. So huge fan. But how did you arrive at that name?
So we actually had the name picked out for our son, but obviously decided not to use that. So it's been like, say, 6 years since we had to think about it. I think to be honest, I don't have a great story. I think if memory serves, and I apologize if I'm a little off, there might be like a West African warrior, like queen or warrior leader with that name. And so my father is from West Africa. That had resonance.
A lot of if I remember right, it's pretty a global name because it's the Prophet Muhammad's mother's name.
Yeah.
And so it kind of made its way all over the world, you know?
Yeah.
And so you see like African Aminas and you see like Jamaican Aminas and you see South Asian Aminas. And there's even an Amina that is a Spanish word, a name that is close to that as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, I saw that. It made me happy. We call Amina, she's the youngest of our kids' generation in our family, and we call her Queen Amina. And so I was happy to hear,
based on the Roots song, right?
Yeah.
Silent Treatment, if you remember that song.
I do.
Yeah. My middle name, my name is Amin, but our parents gave us American first names just to make life easier as little kids in the 70s and 80s. But yeah. So hey, man, you know what? Thanks for being such a force of awesome, good, positive energy and work. And like
guidance for this neighborhood.
we're so lucky that we have someone as smart and hardworking and awesome as you and your family as like a great model for us on how to be awesome citizens. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, man.
Hey, thank you both. I really appreciate you having this great conversation with me and appreciate the work that you do in our community, right? Because it's a community. It's all of us coming together to find ways to support one another. So I think this is a great, I guess, emerging tradition that you've set up over these last number of weeks. And I hope once COVID dies down that this is still something that can be continued in some way. I think it's
we'd love to have you on again. There's a lot of things I want to ask you. So let's do it. Hey, as we're heading out, Matt, thank you again. But do you want to shout out where people can reach you in your office if they need anything, want to engage your team as you discussed?
Absolutely. So our phone number, 773-868-4747, email info@aldermanmartin.com. We're on social media as well. Email is often the best way given the fact that we're working remotely. But just reach out, let us know how we can help. We're here for you.
Yeah, and can you pass, please, for us, the thanks to your whole team. They are always so helpful every time we need something as business owners, as residents. So, right now it's all about, as you said, the team and the colleagues. So big up to the 47th Ward staff. It's awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll do. Thank you both so much and be well.
Much love, man.